Hey everyone, I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about Man of Steel. And this movie is directed by Zack Snyder, and it came out in 2013. And when this movie first came out, it was very controversial, and I never saw this movie in theaters. I saw it at home on TV, and I think I've seen it a few times, at least like twice in my life. I decided to rewatch it just to see how it would hold up all these years later, because there were people who were really defending it and saying that the action was great, and other people are saying like it's too dark and it shouldn't be in a Superman movie, and Superman causes too much destruction and it doesn't really save anyone on top of that. And I decided to go in with an open mind to see how the film would hold up. And I gotta say, while I don't really have much of an issue with the amount of destruction in this movie, that would probably be the least of my issues here, because while watching the movie, I was like, okay, like this is happening, and there were other things that I was thinking of while while so many other people were complaining about the destruction, I was complaining about the filmmaking and other stuff, because with this film, lots of notes I had for it. I would say for the first 20 minutes, it was okay. Not great, but okay. Basically, it's just taking place on Krypton, showing that Superman being born and all the stuff that led up to him being like sent to Earth. And while I don't think that stuff is great, and it does kind of feel like, I don't know, at least an hour's worth of scenes should be there to help with that type of build-up. It kind of felt like the climax to another story that we didn't quite get. And that's one of my criticisms that I'll get into later. But the first 20 minutes were okay. Like, that stuff, not the worst stuff in the movie. And the effects looked pretty good for the most part. There were some good performances in this movie. I liked Henry Cavill as Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman, whatever you want to call him. Amy Adams, she was fine as Lois Lane. She didn't really have much to work with, and she didn't have much to do either, despite having a lot of screen time. Russell Crowe was pretty good. I would say he gave out the best performance in the movie, and the rest are like either okay or decent-ish for the most part. I love the music in the movie. I think it's really great, and it's very memorable, and I can just think of it right now and imagine the scene that it was used in. And I love the music independently of the film, not with the film, because, and this is where I'm going to start to get into my criticisms, is that I didn't really feel invested while watching this movie. And because of that, as much as I love the music, the way it's used in the film did feel very manipulative. And unfortunately, I can't really rate the film highly because of the music, because music plays two factors, independently and how it's used in the movie. Like, at least two factors, and it succeeds at one, but not the other. In my opinion, at least. And also, I do think that there are some good ideas in this film, like exploring that Superman isn't able to save everyone, or like what he should and should not do, like what's the right thing to do. Like, there are some okay ideas like that in this movie. However, the film doesn't really do anything with these ideas. It mentions them, but it's kind of just forgotten about after a while. And there's just, for a lack of a better way of explaining it, there just comes a point in the film where it just stops being important. So it's like, okay, that's mentioned, and like the rest of the movie goes by and I just completely forget about it. And I'm not really a big fan of the characters in this movie. Even Superman I didn't like in this movie. What really stood out to me in this film was that he's kind of unlikable in a few ways. Like, when he's being pushed around at a bar, he like gets his revenge by destroying this one guy's truck. Like, it was, I think, supposed to be played for a laugh, and I'll get into that in a minute. But there were a couple other things, like there was a flashback in earlier in the film where he was just a kid in school and he was like having trouble controlling his powers, and so he just ran inside of a janitor's closet and locked the door, and the teacher was trying to get in, and to keep her away he uses his heat vision on the doorknob and burns her hand. I know those are only a few things, but it really sets me back as to making me like the character. And he also is kind of a thief. He just steals people's clothes when he feels like it. Like early on in the film. I know that's one thing, but man, throughout the entire film, he just doesn't really do anything to redeem himself. And I get it, he's kind of saving people and stopping a menace, but I just can't let those things go because they happened in the movie, and no. Nope, can't get behind it. The visual effects in this movie were very inconsistent, and in the first half of the movie, I thought they looked pretty great at times. Every once in a while, there will be a moment where I was like, that doesn't look too great, but once we get into the second half of the movie, that's where it gets, like, full-on cartoony. Like, people look like they're kind of plasticky, almost to the point where they look like the Smiths from The Matrix Reloaded. I forgot the title there for a second. And if you've seen The Matrix Reloaded, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I kind of got that same vibe in this movie once we got into the second half, because the last hour of this movie is like where all of the action is, and everything prior to that, except for the first 20 minutes, there's a little bit of action in there. Everything in between is nothing but people just talking, and it's not that entertaining, except for like a couple things when we're learning about Kal-El, like his history, and Krypton's history. Like, that was kind of interesting, and the effects were pretty cool there, but the longer this movie goes on, the worse the effects get, and it really bugs me in scenes where it really matters, because they're in action scenes, and in an action scene, effects really matter. And here's a tiny thing that kind of bugged me while rewatching this movie. It was during the action scenes or fight scenes, the camera would just randomly zoom on certain shots, and I hate that so much. It's so distracting and unnecessary. Like, it could have been just removed from the film entirely, and you wouldn't lose anything. Much like the flashback sequences in this movie. I believe Christopher Nolan was involved in this movie, and the impression I get is Zack Snyder kind of wanted this movie to be like the Dark Knight of Superman movies. Like, kind of somewhat in the same vein as those movies. And in here, it just doesn't work. And more on that later. But the reason I brought up Christopher Nolan more so is because of the flashbacks. Christopher Nolan likes to like mess with time in his movies, whether it be like flashbacks or non-chronological order in which scenes are taking place, like in Memento or Following, or pretty much the majority of his films. And in this movie, it's just flashbacks, and the flashbacks are in order: him as a child, and then he's a man, then him as a teenager man, then basically an adult the last years of his teenage life, and then he's a man again. And while on one hand it's not confusing in any way, and it is pretty obvious of what they're trying to say, for pretty much the entirety of the film, when it comes to flashbacks in this film, there's nothing really we gain from all those flashbacks. They can be easily taken out of the movie, and the movie would be no different. But at the same time, I am kind of happy that they exist in the film, because we got some hilarious child acting. And the child actors, all of them who played young Clark Kent, were all bad and hilarious to watch, in my opinion. I wasn't really a fan of Michael Shannon's performance in this movie. I thought he was kind of bad. And he was either just fine at points, but in other scenes, And by other scenes, I mean vast majority of his presence or screen time, when he has screen time, he's really over the top and goofy, and I cannot take him seriously, and he was very distracting for me. I also think the movie looks pretty bad, even when it's not CG. Like, I just don't like the look of the movie. Everything looks gray, and it makes the visual effects look fake and very distracting. And especially in the third act of the movie, where all of the action takes place. And the reason why I bring this up is because I saw a video once where they like color corrected the film to make it like bright, like Superman is supposed to be. And it was just like a few trailer shots, and the effects looked so much better. I couldn't believe it. And now that I've seen that, all I can think while watching this movie is how much better would this have looked if they just color corrected the movie to be like bright and colorful instead of just dark gray nonsense that just doesn't look interesting. And I did mention that I liked some of the ideas in this movie, and me not liking the approach because they didn't really do anything with it. But to make matters worse, the dialogue in this movie is terrible, and that's also something that really bothers me. No one talks like they're a human being or as if they have emotion. It's all very serious, and sometimes they talk very robotically, if that makes sense. Like I'm just watching machines in a film act out in the entire film, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. I also felt as though the characters were underdeveloped. There's a lot of characters in this movie, but I can just look at each and every one of them, and I'm like, I don't really know anything about you. They just get a lot of screen time, and that's it. They just get a lot of screen time, and they don't really flesh out anyone's character. And another thing that let me down about this movie was the action. And I know a lot of people love the action in this movie. I don't. And my biggest reason as to why I don't enjoy the action is because it feels too video gamey. Like the way it's handled and how characters are approaching each other when they fight, it just feels like I'm watching a video game. And it's so much less enjoyable for me. Like there was one action scene in the first 20 minutes with General Zod and Jor-El, and that was okay, even if some of the fight choreography was noticeable and embarrassing. Like there were a couple punches that looked like it was just they were pretending to punch and didn't look like there was any force when they were moving their arms. But at the very least, it was practical from what I could tell. But in the action scenes with Superman, like when he's battling other Kryptonians, I don't really get a sense of pain, really. It's just like, how much damage are you really doing? I just never got a sense that certain characters were being hurt or harmed, and there were points where the gun sound effects were terrible because they were like incredibly quiet. Like they had silencers on or something. And that was kind of weird. And there are so many moments in this movie that are either played for, I guess, a laugh or just doesn't feel like it's taking itself seriously. But it doesn't really fit in this movie because throughout the entire film, it just feels like it's taking itself super seriously, like no levity whatsoever. And when you have moments where Superman destroys the one guy's truck, it just feels out of place. Like it doesn't belong in the movie. And it just feels like it should be in another movie, like the MCU. Whereas, like, you could get away with some of these things a bit more easily. But in this movie, there's no, like, signs of self-awareness that I can pick up while watching the movie. So any things that I find to be cheesy in this movie just hurt the experience. And to top it all off, nothing really makes any sense. There are so many things in this movie I was like, oh, how does this work? Or why couldn't you just do that? And the movie doesn't really explain how certain things work, which I guess is a good thing because the movie's already 2.5 hours long, but at the same time, it's kind of frustrating because you think about one thing and then all of a sudden the movie kind of starts to fall apart. And that's about all I have to say about Man of Steel. A very stupid movie that does not have any self-awareness to it whatsoever. I don't like the characters, I don't like the action, I don't like the effects after a certain point. And it just fails to deliver what I would want, even from a basic superhero movie or a Superman movie. Come on, just give me something that I would find to be satisfying, and the movie doesn't offer that. However, I will say this much, I was able to enjoy this movie somewhat ironically, because there are moments where it does get funny bad, especially with Michael Shannon and his performance. Like, that stuff I enjoyed, and there were some other moments sprinkled throughout the film that I found to be kind of funny, like unintentionally funny. And yeah, as a funny bad movie, it's not the worst choice ever, and even taking those elements out of the conversation, not the worst movie ever made. There is some things that bump it up from being like a really bad movie. So it's a bit better made than just the average horrible movie. So I can give it credit for that. It does try, and in some ways I appreciate that. I mean, not in ways that it's probably intending, but in other ways it is kind of a chore to sit through because there are plenty of scenes that are pretty dull, or at least to me they're dull. And that's about all I have to say. So with all that being said, I'm going to give Man of Steel a 4 out of 10. Thank you for watching my videos as always. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to leave a like and comment down below you thought of Man of Steel, and my social media links, they will all be in the description, so follow me there. And last but not least, subscribe to be a part of Foley Nation, and I'll see you when I get my next review up, and that is going to be for Fred Claus. So look forward to that, but until I get that up, thank you for watching and have a great day.